If there's one thing that a lot of fans have been demanding over the years is, of course, the firing of Kathleen Kennedy and replacing her with somebody else. Now, we already know that everything related to both John, George, and Dave working together as a trio of a team, and how both John and Dave have a lot of privileges over at Lucasfilm. They are almost accurately working as presidents of the company. That's what it really comes across as. Almost like they have those privileges for the most part. They basically are now in full creative power over everything, about everything with Star Wars, except for Acolyte and Skeleton Crew, and they're beginning to also take over portions of the High Republic as well, which, by the way, still is in line with Kathleen Kennedy, but they're taking it over piece by piece. We'll tap into that in a second. But the thing about Disney CEO Bob Iger, he had a couple of things to say about Kathleen Kennedy. This is Mike Zero. Subscribe if you're new and like this video to see future Star Wars updates. I'm also on Twitter at Mike01. I thank you all so very much for the kind and great support. Now, like I said before, fans have wanted Kathleen Kennedy gone now for years. I think it really settled in 2017 when The Last Jedi released. I think that was the real deal breaker, where people said, alright, with The Force Awakens, we were just suspecting that things were a little off. Now with The Last Jedi, things are totally off, and we want her out. And it didn't take all that much, you know, if you think about it. You know, Lucasfilm got taken over by Disney back in 2012. They had a couple of years to make The Force Awakens, and up until, I would say, around the very end of 2014 is when Kathleen Kennedy started really boosting up the press and the PR moves for The Force Awakens and stuff like that. Now, the thing about all of this is what Bob Iger had to say about firing Kathleen Kennedy, replacing her with somebody else, and responding to this age-old question. Since it is already in the works, guys, we know that Bob Iger and the board are planning on getting rid of her by this August. However, right now, Favreau and Filoni are getting ready to make some pretty big announcements for the franchise that will make fans surprised by this year's celebration event. However, it's described that recently Bob Iger was questioned about plans to fire Kathleen Kennedy and replacing her with somebody else, and he had a couple of things to say to the community that may come off as a surprise. Now, Bob Iger went on to say the following: "In this business, it's a very tough one. Sometimes we feel we make the right decisions that ended up being our worst ones, looking back. The question always has come up to us about Miss Kennedy, and what I will say is that we are having meetings once a week on how we can create a remedy to Lucasfilm's leadership successor. We are talking about this all the time between myself, the board, and those creatives over at Lucasfilm like John, Dave, Pablo, and others, bringing this franchise into one. The film industry is a very delicate business, and we have to make sure that we are going to do things perfectly moving along into the future." Now let me pause right here, because he does have a couple of more things to say after this. I just want to go over one major piece here, is how he mentions that they are focused on the new leadership of Lucasfilm, the successor of the leadership of Lucasfilm. Obviously, you know, referencing of these plans that they want to get David Heyman in there. We've talked about this many times, that is now the big plan. Initially, they wanted to get Ron Howard. That seems to have fallen apart because he's getting held up in his scheduling with shows and some upcoming movies and stuff like that. But David Heyman, a guy who really, you know, took big part in the Harry Potter films, big-time Hollywood producer, also, by the way, a very big Star Wars fan, believe it or not. That's the type of guy that you need, somebody that is a fan, somebody that's passionate, somebody that knows how Star Wars just works with the audience. And I think that's the biggest problem right now, is that given that Kathleen Kennedy still only has control over Acolyte and Skeleton Crew, regardless, those two are going to differ from John and Dave's work because she has no clue on how Star Wars really operates on a viewership level. And you got to really understand your audience on how Star Wars really works. And only the fans know that, only George Lucas knows that. That's exactly why John and Dave understand that, because Dave Filoni was the protege of George Lucas, and Jon Favreau is a true filmmaker that really respects George's work. So that brings us to the next thing that Kathleen Kennedy had to say, or should I say, that Bob Iger had to say about Kathleen Kennedy, indirectly speaking, of course. And it comes off as a little bit of a shocker because we already know that there's a lot of plans happening for this. So let's tap into this. Now, he goes on to say, it's something that a person with better leadership skills would need to acquire such success, both theatrically and on streaming, for us and for how Lucasfilm succeeds. And there you have it. I mean, he's indirectly telling us that, yeah, we want to fire her as soon as possible. Now, separate from what Iger stated, this all alludes to his plans on firing Kathleen Kennedy sometime in August after Indiana Jones 5 debuts. Now, right now, Bob Iger and the board are still extremely unhappy with the results of Acolyte and Skeleton Crew after new footage was shown to the Disney board and others associated with the shows. So keep in mind here is that the board is very unhappy with Kathleen Kennedy's input on the franchise, especially with the Star Wars universe. So far, Indiana Jones 5 is looking just okay. It doesn't look like it's going to be a big hit. The trailer may have caught a lot of people, but from what's been, happening behind closed doors, Indiana Jones 5 is going to fall flat. Now, when we look at everything related to Kathleen Kennedy's work on Star Wars, Bob Iger really putting it out there that in order for Lucasfilm to succeed, they need new leadership. And I think it's a fact that now Disney is very much in panic mode about their image when it comes to Star Wars because, number one, Kathleen Kennedy prematurely announced so many Star Wars movies that ended up not even happening, not even close to a script. And number two, Kathleen Kennedy says a lot of bad things about the fandom, about the fans directly, and how she's also, by the way, creating her own company behind the scenes that's going to actually combat against Star Wars, Star Trek, Dune, all those sci-fi franchises. And I would imagine Disney's not all that happy about that. That's really kind of like backstabbing your own company while you're still hired. That's basically her little game plan. Once she gets out or gets fired, whatever happens, of course, she has that company of hers to run to that falls under the dub called Starlight Productions. That's just a placeholder name for the company, by the way. But anyways, a lot of things happening. I think that by the end of this year, you're going to see a big shift in tone because of what John and Dave are doing with Mando 3 and Ahsoka. Those two shows are really going to create momentum. Skeleton Crew, try not to let it break your momentum. Just realize that there's only 2 projects as of right now that Kathleen Kennedy has control over, and the rest is all John and Dave. And I think it's more healthy to focus on John and Dave's work entirely because they do care about the fans deeply. Anyways, drop a comment below, guys. Let me know what you guys have to say about all this below in the comments. And if you guys did enjoy the content for today, make sure to drop a thumbs up on this video to support the channel. I thank you all so very much for the kind support, and I'll catch you guys next time.
Gun in hand, we are alone again. No hiding from night to moon.